just relaxed and paying attention.
Oh, yes, we are relaxed and we are paying attention, especially to these guys, right? Yeah. All right. Okay. This is 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Bob. Our executive producer and research assistant is Dr. Laura Cordner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington. And our guest is Linda Godfrey. I Know What I Saw, Modern-Day Encounters with Monsters of New Urban Legend and Ancient Lore, published by TarcherPerigee. You can contact her at lindagodfrey.com, and all links are at 21stcenturyradio.com and zaharaonline.com. And, of course, don't forget, our archives are also posted weekly for free on iTunes and on our YouTube channel. Welcome back, Linda.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
How's your pitching arm? Are you ready?
I guess so. I will give it a try.
All right. Now, by the way, you noted that there are female human and animal spirit creatures, and one of the best known and the most sacred to many tribal people of the United States is the white buffalo, calf woman. How did her appearance help usher in a new era of mankind?
Well, white buffalo woman, strangely enough, was born about, half a mile from where my mother lived at the time. I have all these major happenings. There seems to be a relative of mine hanging around in the background.
That's interesting karma, though, isn't it?
It is, and it keeps happening. I could give you example after example. But anyway, because I was working for the newspaper at that time, and my mother lived down there, and some good friends of ours were related to the owners, I was able to get to go and interview them and meet some of the chieftains and other personnel from the tribal people across the nation. And so I heard, what I heard from them pretty much gelled with what was being printed about their legends and their beliefs on this spirit person / creature. She was supposed to come. She had appeared to them once a long time ago and said she would come to show about the time when the world would be reunited and people would be in peace, and that there would be a white buffalo, a yellow buffalo, a red buffalo, and a black buffalo to represent all the ethnicities of humans. And we did have that. There were buffaloes born in succeeding times from that with these different colors. And so according to the white buffalo calf woman, we should be getting ready to get out our doves and our peace symbols, because that's what she represented. And if nothing else, we don't know the time or the date for that, of course, but many Native Americans that I talked to just felt so grateful and so humbled that this chief legend of theirs had come to pass, that it sort of struck a new life, a new heart into them, and I think it opened up. Some people have told me that to them that meant that they could open up some of their ancient stories and beliefs that they had been keeping secret to themselves all these years. And I've experienced that. I've been told things and shown things that would not have been available to me before.
Well, you found that in 2011, the Ohio Aerospace Institute released a statement suggesting a possible spacecraft propulsion system that could be powered by light or sound waves. What can you share with us about that propulsion system?
Well, that was it was a supposed story or legend, but as with all of these culture stories, as many are told, they're meant to display an inner truth or a truth that won't be discovered until later. Mm-hmm. And there was a young Native American man who had seen a strange craft come down from the heavens to the earth and land, and there were lovely maidens in there, and in order to, he was invited to come and be the husband of one of them, and got to go in the spacecraft. And what he noticed was that the spacecraft could not begin, it would not start up or leave or work until they sang a certain song and sang it in a certain way. And that sounds like a delightful, charming fairy tale. You know, oh, the spacecraft was made to go by a song. Well, now that institution that you just mentioned the name of has found out that sonic power can indeed do more than we thought. And that they're talking about, I heard it just on excuse me, a TV show the other day, talking about sonic energy being a very different sort of form that can really change our whole aerospace industry by, rather than having to rely on heavy fuel, it can use this sort of, and don't ask me to explain the sonic energy, because that I'm not a physicist and I haven't studied that even enough to say you know, a minor thing about it. But I thought, here we have this was a very old story that they had about this young man and wives and the sonic energy that made the spacecraft go. And here we are finding that in our own physics of this day, mirroring this same concept. And they were right.
Well, there were a number of people back in the early 90s. We interviewed maybe 15 or 20 scientists that had worked on developing fuel that, would not pollute, and were pretty advanced in many different ways, but of course they were all washed out by the media. The media went after each and every one of them. And some of these scientists and some of these other people that were creators died during this process because of the stress that had been placed on them. Because our government does not want you to know that these things do exist. Free energy does exist. And those who have studied it can't open their mouth now. They cannot. They will be thrown in jail and lost.
I'm surprised nobody has done anything. Well, I'm not going to say I'm surprised at. Maybe I don't want to give anybody ideas, but you know, I again, in this same book, I've got a chapter where it mentions some European connections, and I talk about this woman who was right after World War II, and a lot of people from Germany were trying very hard to get to the U.S. And there was a woman, very intelligent woman, who worked at one of the Nazi space development institutions right around the North Sea. And she was trying to get someone to sponsor her to come to the U.S. And through a relationship, and actually through my uncle, the one that gave me the small amount that I invested in a film, my grandmother Elsie had only a 5th grade vacation. Education. Vacation. That would be a very long vacation. She had only a 5th grade education because she was the oldest and had to quit so the younger ones could go to school. But somehow she became friends with this woman who began writing her these long letters. And when my mom passed away a few years ago, I got this box of letters, and I had never read them. And one of them was from this woman. Her name was Louisa. And I could see where her mind was going. She was a very educated person. You could tell that too. And she started out telling about how bad conditions were in post-war Germany at the time. There were rats in the house, and she had to cut up a blanket to make herself a coat and that sort of thing. And then she changed gear, and she said, well, I have to tell you that we know what the flying saucers are. And she was kind of joking that the Russians bragged that they invented them, but of course they bragged about everything, she said. And it was really quite lively. And then she said, well, here, of course, we now know what they really are. And she drew this little diagram. And this is in the book with the postage, so you can tell nobody drew this later or made it up. But it's shaped like what they called the bell, die Glocke, if you ever watched
Yes.
the programs about those things. And it had flared, kind of a flare at the bottom. And she said, we know that the propellers are inside the wings, which she meant, by that she meant this flaring out thing at the bottom. They looked exactly like what you see in these books today. And she's writing this to my grandmother with a 5th grade education who never talked to anybody outside the family normally. And I'm thinking, why? It's just so weird. So that's in the book too. All these strange little segues. To me, they show that life is some sort of everything works together. I'll put it that way somehow in ways we don't normally see.
Have you ever listened to Gaia radio? Do you ever get Gaia?
Yes.
Gaia? Then you're well aware then of what I'm about ready to say, because they have one story after another in regards to what is opening up in regards to the UFO research and the other beings. Because now we know this. We know that the Germans they did create UFOs. They were helped by alien beings to create them. So has America. America is also. Now, you're not supposed to know any of this. And if you talk to other people in government, they're, of course, going to deny it. But in the years to come, it's going to all be let out. It's very unfortunate that there are so many things in the world today that could be corrected that are not going to be corrected because the government will not allow us to know about them. If I said anything that offended you there, I'm sorry. But,
Me? No.
No, but Germany was far ahead of us in lots of things, and they did indeed, as we're going to find out, had something to do with going down and setting up in Antarctica and discovering an ancient group of beings. And I think when we focus again, if we ever get to, because NASA never opens up to us when anything. You can't really believe them. Now, and if I offended you there, I'm sorry, but I mean.
No, you have not. Trust me, I've run into these things myself. Where I've had some retribution. And it can be very small and petty on their parts, but still kind of scary. I had been following the news in western Wisconsin of a really close-up daylight Bigfoot sighting where this man was riding along the edge of a park, and just to enter and go into the park and do whatever he wanted. And this Bigfoot just kind of popped up out of the bushes, and he got a really good look at it and reported it to the rangers, and they said, no, you just saw, it was probably a ginseng poacher, and he was just wearing his suit with there's a name for these suits, ghillie suit was what they said. And I had a lot of reasons to refute that. I called the Clark County Sheriff and gave him my reasons, including the long time it was able to look at it, the daylight, the proximity. And he's just, no, that's not it. It could be. Well, the next day, my husband and our oldest grandson and I were standing in our living room, which had a big window that opened to kind of a drop-off down into the Kettle Moraine State Forest. And this unmarked helicopter came up the hill. Almost, he went so close over our house that he almost hit the chimney, which is totally illegal. Roared only over our house, and then just kind of went around and left. It was pretty much a direct message in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I mean, they will try and correct the pettiest outbreaks, that they consider might endanger the official line, and that's really brought to the forefront in Return to Wildcat Mountain, because that's what these people are being told. There was a woman who was doing a ride-along with a DNR agent, because the woman wanted to be in the service there someday, and they saw a female mountain lion with 2 kittens. And when the DNR agent found out that this woman was going to be in our film, the agent said, well, if you're in that film, you will never have a job in law enforcement.
That's the way it is. That's the way it is. I'm glad all of our eyes are open, but unfortunately our government's moving in the wrong direction. So I don't know. It's going to take decades before we get back to where we once were. But break time on 21st Century Radio. Indeed. Time out here on 21st Century Radio with our guest, Linda Godfrey. I Know What I Saw, Modern Day Encounters with Monsters of New Urban Legend and Ancient Lore, TarcherPerigee. And also go to Linda, if you want to get in touch with her, LindaGodfrey.com. There it is. That's yeah, okay. That's what it is.
This is Jerome Clark, author of Unexplained: Strange Sightings, Incredible Occurrences, and Puzzling Physical Phenomena. You're listening to Dr. Bob Hieronimus on 21st Century Radio.
Up and at 'em. Well, welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Bob Hieronimus, and of course our guest is Linda Godfrey. And if you want to reach her, LindaGodfrey.com is where you go. Linda?
Yes.
I got an important question for you that if you can answer this question, you're going to win a free trip to Bermuda. You ready? You want to go to Bermuda, don't you?
Oh, I've always wanted to go to Bermuda.
Okay, here's your chance now. There have been a number of cases from contemporary UFO research that have involved both UFOs and strange animal humanoid creatures that look and act like they're not from here. Could you give us a couple of examples, please?
Well, one of the best ones actually is in Wisconsin, wouldn't you know, up in Frederick, in the northern, very far northern part of the state. And there was a farmer who was coming home from a farm group meeting one night. His name was Bozak, was his last name, and he's driving along and he sees this thing just come down and sit by, I think it was actually in the road in front of him. And it had very unusual looks. He could see the whole top of it was glass, so he had a good look at it. And it was just sitting there staring at him with its arms kind of up. He didn't know if it was like a surrendering type of thing or if it was going to shoot flames out of the palms of its hands at him or what. But he was really terrified, and he said it had kind of a long face. It was covered with fur, and it didn't look like it was a big creature or anything. It was just somehow piloting this vehicle. That became known as the Bozak incident. And there have been other incidents that people have recorded where sometimes, or a couple of times, it was mini werewolves, things that looked like tiny Sasquatches. They were in the same form, but not the same size. So I don't know if that wins me my trip to Bermuda, but you get the idea that there have been over the years these things that look like part human, part animal, and therianthrope is another name that's often used for them, and they're somehow connected with these vehicles that don't move like the vehicles we know of in our own science. So it almost seems like they have associations with one another because they don't always look exactly alike. You've probably heard of the guy who got the pancakes from outer space.
Oh, yes, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great story, and it again happened in Wisconsin. And what he saw did not look anything like the free little beasts. They were smallish-sized men. He thought they looked like they might be of Italian descent for some reason. They were wearing tight-fitting suits that matched, and it looked like they had a griddle, and they were making pancakes inside their little sort of capsule-type craft.
Yeah.
And they gave him a couple of them. So they're generous. So those are two that I can think of just off the top of my head. But there are more. You know, other people have written about others, and there's just this common denominator. And it kind of translates also into not just things that look like spacecrafts, but lights, usually very spherical, dimly glowing lights. And they're normally described as about the size of a basketball. And sometimes the light will stop and the light will sort of disappear. And then you will get things. I actually somehow intuited that you were going to ask me this question, even though I didn't list it. But
well, I read your entire book.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't.
You were
going
to add something else?
That I'm just trying to think of how to put this the best.
Okay.
That John Keel used the word transmogrify. Mm-hmm. That as you're watching them, they slowly turn into, say, a native shaman or a weird animal or some other form that you didn't expect it to be. And it appears that, and I've also heard in some of my research on Native American things that the shamans or the medicine men or specially trained people in the tribes will often use these as modes of transport. Some of the names for them literally mean he goes fast. So they can get into one of these spheres somehow, change the molecules in their body to be in this sphere, and then just take off. And in my travels and investigations, I have actually encountered at close range 2 times when I've seen these spheres. One was with one witness, another one was with 2 witnesses. And it's talked about I think it's in this book and not the last one, Monsters Among Us. I might have talked about it in that one. But yeah, we were just staking out a field and we saw this light that I thought was an airplane at first sight, and it began to hide itself toward us. I don't know why I used a Shakespearean word for hide.
Because you had a life, and you had a life reincarnated back in England.
Well, there I go, and I'm just slipping in those. Yeah.
Yeah, we all do that every now and then.
There you go. So anyway, it's heading across this 40-acre field toward my 2 friends and I. And these guys were both in the front seat. I was sitting in the back because I don't like to be sneaked up upon, and I can see better that way. But I had noticed that light heading toward us, and I said, guys, look, I don't think that thing's an airplane. And as I said that, and as they looked at it, and we all put our attention upon it, it began to move toward us. And we saw that it was not, it was sort of faking how big it was in relationship to the landscape, because it looked like the size of an airplane landing light when we first saw it, but as it came closer, and it stopped maybe, 20 feet in the air, 20 feet away from us, and just hovered. And it was a white with perhaps, if anything, a silvery blue tint to it, but not much. It was mostly white, solid sphere, and it just hung there. And we all 3 of us felt that it was curious and wanted to know what we were. And the guy who was driving, my friend Sanjay Singhal, grabbed a mag light and just sort of spontaneously shined it out of the car window at this thing. And it started, we argued about this word. We finally came up with jittering to describe this very fine jittering movement that it made. And then it just didn't pop, it didn't burst, it sort of just fell in on itself. And we were all yelling, and I didn't get a photo because as Sanjay just disintegrated it or made it fold in on itself before I could get my camera quite up to my face. It wasn't his fault, but that always happens. So there we were. These 2 guys, one is a retired math and physics teacher, the other one is an architect, and it's it's somebody that I've worked with for years, so it's not any newbie. We all were quite experienced at looking for things that we never found. Here was something that found us. Mm-hmm. And it just reminded me of all of those Native American stories where the medicine men had these spheres and got into them or became part of them and traveled to where they needed to go.
Well, the Native Americans were teachers of our founding fathers, especially Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and others, John Adams. And what is amazing is that most people in this country have no idea just how important the founding fathers were in regards to being Native Americans. Except, of course, when we just take their land and everything else they have. And obviously, I'm pretty unhappy about that particular situation, because they were the ones that turned us on to what a democracy, or what a balanced government is. And we have not thanked them ever. Except for when our founding fathers were around. That's when they got thanked, because they were the ones that needed the help.
Right. Well, yeah, it was just a tragic loss of life. All the things that happened to our Native people, some intended, some unintended. It just was not a good situation, and it's difficult.
Well, you realize that there were many other times and places when people were looking for some particular spooky thing, but found a dogman or other unknown canines instead, such as in Reed City, Michigan, I think it was, in June 2005. What can you share with us about that experience, especially the experience of seeing dogs walking on two legs, even in a couple of them at a time?
Well, that incident was, the people always ask me if I have seen the dog man. And I have to answer, I may have seen part of one. I can't say for sure that I saw it. Whereas I have seen Bigfoot, and I would swear that that's what they were, because I had good looks at them in the daytime. And it was easy for me to see that they weren't anything else. Whereas this was back on a very poorly graveled road. And it was in August. It was about 95 degrees at night. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, because that was the time that these witnesses had reported to me that they had been out there twice at the site of an abandoned house that was first thought to be haunted by, it was the local lore went that this was an abandoned schoolhouse where children were hurt, and so you could hear the children crying, the ghost children. Well, these 3 young people, college-age people, went out there a couple of nights just to see, the ghost people. They weren't expecting anything else. And they looked in the back window, heard some noises, and there was a tall humanoid figure with shaggy brown hair. They estimated it was about 6 feet tall. And I think that one was just looking at them, if I'm correct. And they took off. They were very, very frightened. And then they got this feeling that they wanted to go back and see. Some people say, well, I started feeling silly. I wanted to just, verify it somehow. And so they made another trip back there. And that time there was a taller one. They estimated it at 7 feet tall with gray hair all over its body. And this one chased the car. And so then they really did. It was kind of like the other one called in Daddy, and Daddy made them understand they had to get out of there. So, well, of course, that's where I went back. I was working on a TV show for the old Monster Quest series. And so it was me, and there was a History Channel cameraman, and he had a van, and the witnesses were out there. They had their own separate car. And we just kind of sat out there from, I think, maybe 10 till almost 3. And we kept hearing noises in the bushes. We kept hearing kind of little growls. At one time, I heard a sound that's just like if you got a dog at home that ever got wet and it shook its fur out, that's exactly what we heard, only it was like the sound of a huge one. And there were yellow eyes in the bushes, and that's the normal canine eye shine color that you would see. So finally, we had a big floodlight that was shining down the road. The thought of the cameraman was it would maybe be seen in the spotlight if it tried to cross to the other side for some reason. So I happened to be turned that way. The cameraman happened to be turned the opposite way, which is always how it goes. And we heard something come scuttling up from the ditch, ran across the road close enough to that spotlight just so that its spine was illuminated as it went through. That was the only thing I could see was the spine. The spine was vertical, covered with gray fur. And when it left this little lighted area, it had to cross in front of a reflective road sign. And when we measured that, we discovered that it would have had to have been 7 feet tall because it blotted out part of that road sign as it passed it. And at that point, the witnesses insisted that we leave because they were just terrified that they'd been out of the car and that close to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, obviously, when you don't know what really can happen, you want to be safe. I mean, you want to be safe.
We were not armed. And the weird thing was no other humans were out there unless that was a human in a dog suit. But I really doubt it because, like I said, it was 95 to 96 degrees and it was almost 100% humidity. It was fixing to rain. You know, there was lightning, all that kind of thing. Very dramatic. It would have been, anybody would have fainted after 2 minutes in that suit. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there was. But somebody stole my Minolta camera out of the van, the History Channel van, and there was nobody there to do that. And anybody who walked up to it and opened that door would have been seen by me, the cameraman, or the witnesses. And it was so baffling. Everybody helped me. We walked the ditches and didn't find it. And then we did leave. But it was so convincing. There was absolutely no way to imagine what happened to it. They did buy me a new camera.
Oh, that's good to them.
Yeah.
But we got to take a break here. Our last break on 21st Century Radio with Linda Godfrey. I Know What I Saw. You should get at least one copy of this book, maybe two. And we'll be right back in just a few minutes.
Hi, this is Linda Moulton Howe, reporter and editor of EarthFiles.com. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus, exploring issues beyond the 6 o'clock news.
Linda Moulton Howe, a legend in her own time. What an extraordinary woman. So far ahead of so many other men that I worked with and she worked with. Extraordinary soul. Linda Moulton Howe. Okay, welcome back to 21st Century Radio with our guest Linda Godfrey. You can reach her at lindagodfrey.com. And remember again, all links are at 21stcenturyradio.com and zaharaonline.com. And my beloved is probably listening tonight, so hello, dear. And I got a very important question for you, Linda.
Okay. Do I win a Bermuda vacation with this one, too?
Almost. Almost.
Okay.
Well, you'll get it. You'll get there sooner or later. I know you will. Here's the question. Is it possible that modern dog-like creatures are being artificially manufactured?
Some people think so. And one person who did was a very level-headed, educated, nice man who wrote to me and said he was on a one of those specially padded, kind of rubberized walking tracks. It was outdoors. And he could see that there were dogs coming toward him from somewhere in front of him. And they were a little bit peculiar, these dogs. And he did not know for sure what they were, but he kept watching them. And he said what struck him was that they looked well fed. They didn't look like strays, well groomed, like a medium size, and that when they passed him, they just kept going. They didn't. If anybody ever walked a dog, you know, my dogs have all they run one way, they run another way. You have to rein them in. Then they're straining to look at a squirrel. These dogs walked in perfectly matched steps, not going to the right or the left. They didn't even look at this man. And he said it struck him that, if anything, they were not necessarily clones, because clones still are independent. They have independent intelligences and muscles, and they looked like they were somehow within one mind, that they were trained to walk in one way or bred that way, or maybe they'd had special surgery that made them able to just walk like one unit. And that was creepy enough. I don't know if you want me to tell what he saw the other time. He figured maybe there were government labs that were not necessarily cloning, but somehow changing so that they could be controlled.
Well, that's what we're into. Every way they can control us, they're going to control us. No doubt about that, Linda.
Right. And you can imagine there could be uses for controllable dogs. And I've actually seen this played out in various documentaries. And if people are talking about something and making films on it, it's probably already happened if it's possible. Yeah. Because we don't see everything. But they could be trained to do very particular jobs in time of war, infiltrate, say, a battlefield, carry a message, all those things that would come in very handy. And I've seen films of dogs that have been trained to swim with little harnesses and little things to deliver to whomever by the military. So it's just unusual that there was nobody. The other thing was that nobody had a leash on these things. They were just walking where they were supposed to go without a leash, without a master. That was probably the eeriest thing of all.
Well, I need to ask you to take us to Michigan. There was a Dogman and Massacre burial grounds. That's what it was, yes. Would you tell us about the Michigan Dogman and Massacre burial grounds? This is on page 99 of your book.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. I want to make sure that I have the right one, because there's a couple of different burial ground things, but I'm just going to flip to that. I always keep my book on my lap, because after a while, oh yes, that was what a man who witnessed this thing described as looking and sounding like it rode through the treetops, which is something I wouldn't think that even something that's part human, part dog could do. And a person wrote to me, and there were 3 encounters that occurred in 2016 in rural western Michigan. And this is where, this area of Michigan is where many of the sightings take place, more so than the UP, where you'd think that they might, or others. And in this case, where it was, the forests around the site had a lot of hidden Native American burial grounds. And it's interesting that so very often, this is something I noticed 27 years ago, first off, was that very many of the places where the Dogman is sighted is somehow connected to a Native American sacred place or burial grounds, and especially when there's been a massacre, many of them killed, that is where you will find these. And the remains of hundreds of men, women, and children were buried there very quickly in 1642. So they'd been there for, quite some time. And this man named Brad wrote me that he rounded up the bend in the creek, and he saw what he thought was the back of a black bear, and it was digging into the bank of the creek. And he set his firearm, some kind of gun he had, down on a little island in the creek, snapped a branch just to see what it would do. He was just testing the thing. And it stopped completely. And so then it was Brad's turn to freeze, and he watched it stand up on 2 legs, turn around toward him, and it was 8 feet tall, which is taller than the usual Dogman. They usually range in the reports from maybe 5.5 to at most 7. This one at 8 feet was very large, huge wolf-like head, snout and ears of a dog, and all black fur. So, and it's fairly common to get the black fur. In fact, many times people will say, I saw this thing that reminded me of Anubis from the Egyptian dog gods, because it had the black fur. And often they are very tall and are seen as people as by people as being very intelligent. So it makes me wonder if there's something a little different. I don't know. And it was looking for him. He said it put its snout in the air and looked like it was sniffing the wind. I'm completely freaking out at this point, he wrote. And he reached to pick up his gun, and there was a splash up the creek. He looked up and saw this thing had dropped down to all four legs, and even dropped down that way. He estimated its shoulder height at like 4.5 to 5 feet. Mm-hmm. So this was huge. It almost sounds to me like one of those dire dogs. And if it hadn't been spending so much time on its hind legs, I would have said so. So it looked at him, snarled, and he thought he was going to be eaten or something, when all of a sudden it looked to the east, looked back at him, and then took 2 giant leaps toward the east onto the bank of the creek. And it jumped off of a 25-foot, or jumped a 25-foot distance from one side to the other, and then jumped into the treetops and disappeared.
Whoa.
Which is something, yeah. So just when I think I have these things all figured out, I will get a credible report from somebody who has just a little bit different detail that makes me think, wow, what are these things really? You know, and how can we find out if they're able to elude us in every way, on foot, by our trail cameras, night vision, whatever we have. We don't see them unless they want us to see them, unless it's like Brad's experience where he just sort of snuck up behind it and it really didn't know for a minute because it was busy digging something else. Maybe it was digging at one of those burial grounds. I think a Native American friend told me that it was probably a guardian of that burial ground, especially since it was so big.
Yeah.
And more of a guardian form. So, yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, we got about 4 or 5 minutes left, but with this, would you share with us the Red Hill Werewolf of Hagerstown, Maryland story?
Okay.
That's on page 106.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to double check that to make sure. And yeah, I wish I was completely able to memorize every word, but sometimes.
No, it's not possible. I mean, you've heard.
No, it's not. Not if I want to get the dates in there and get them correctly. I can usually remember most of the stories pretty well, but anyway, this one again had a connection between historic events and then strange animals. And this was a more recent one than the 1642 massacre. One example that occurred in the 1980s, was sent to me a few years ago by the Hagerstown, Maryland gentleman. And he wrote that his father had told him the stories of the werewolf of Red Hill. They used to see a werewolf on this mountain they called Red Hill because it was red clay soil. And they went looking for it in the daylight, and they did come across some caves. So they went and got rope and flashlights. They were braver than I would be. I'm kind of claustrophobic when it comes to caves. And they went in to explore them. And inside they found all kinds of petroglyphs, drawings on the cave walls, and had to get through really narrow passages, climb up ledges. This is where things grew spooky. Well, I would say it was already spooky, but as they're climbing these ledges, all of a sudden something that they couldn't see the rest of it, shot out of the rock crevices and grabbed the man's uncle's wrist. He managed to break free, and the pair hastily left the caves. I think that was probably an understatement on my part. The writer added, "My dad and his friends are not the type to lie about things like this. The area is very historical, and again, a lot of battles have taken place, so there's a lot of supernatural happenings around this town. And there is an old graveyard known as the Red Hill Cemetery near the site of a church on Red Hill Road." And I have to say that cemeteries are one of the most likely human artifacts to be found near sightings, especially older cemeteries, for some reason. And that even goes to cemeteries in places like the U.S. Naval Station just south of Chicago, or north of Chicago, I should say, right on the lakefront. I've had reports from there, again, of the black Anubis-looking kind, with a cemetery right in it. It's a very common place, again, mentioned Germany, and that seems to be a place, especially wherever you had German military installations and a cemetery. It's almost certain. And you'll have noticed there were several incidents that I went through with military areas and the strange appearances of animals.
Indeed. I really enjoyed this book.
Thank you.
How, if we had enough time, I'd ask you the one question I wanted to get to, but we're about out of time, and that was about little people, such as elves and different, oh boy. You got 20 seconds. What do you want to say about the little people?
Well, I'd like to say they're all over the place. There are different types, and you can find them in Europe, in South American jungles, across the USA. They're everywhere. And I happen to be doing a project involving them. If anyone has had any kind of experience with any kind of a little person, elf, whatever you want to call them, if you go to my blog, lindagodfrey.com, and then just go on the tab that says About and scroll down till there's a box where you can send me any kind of message there. So let me know, because I am collecting encounter stories for a project.
Thank you very much, Linda Godfrey. God bless you, dear. See you next week on 21st Century Radio.